Thank you for joining me for this oil painting portrait time-lapse of Breonna Taylor. Some of you who follow me on Instagram might have already seen this painting because I posted it back in early June. I wanted to get this video up much sooner, but I've been having a very hard time mentally and emotionally with not only the pandemic, but politically as well. I was hoping that justice would be served by now, considering what happened to Breonna. For anyone not familiar with this story, Breonna Taylor was 26 years old. She was an EMT working at 2 hospitals during the start of the pandemic as an essential worker. She dreamed of buying a house and starting a family. She was innocent and committed no crimes, and she was killed by 8 police bullets in the middle of the night during a wrongfully conducted raid. There was a no-knock warrant, and it was obtained through 0 actual evidence under false pretenses. Police broke into her home in the middle of the night without knocking or announcing themselves, even though the man they were originally after was already in custody. None of the officers responsible for her death have been fired or arrested, and so many stories like this get swept under the rug or conveniently misrepresented to avoid consequences. I keep hearing this bad apple excuse, but I just don't see how anyone could even excuse the loss of civilian life due to the unlawful and blatant misconduct of police. In my opinion, there's just no room for bad apples in a job that involves lethal weapons, and the entire purpose of that job is supposedly to protect and serve. And if civilian life is lost because of this misconduct, there need to be consequences for those responsible. And given how often this happens, it seems like the screening process for this line of work isn't adequate. If you want to help support Breonna and her family in getting the justice she deserves, please sign the petition that I've linked in the description. Clearly it needs more voices because 10 million is apparently not enough. I'm also not monetizing this video for obvious reasons. This painting is not for sale for obvious reasons. If there's any way I can give this to her family, or if they would even accept it, I would gladly do that, but I just don't want any profit off of it. I made this painting as a way to share Breonna's story and support Black Lives Matter, and it's so sad to me that anyone is made to feel like their life doesn't matter, or that simply existing in their skin puts them at risk. And I know for a lot of people it's hard to see how systemic racism exists and functions in this country when you haven't personally had to experience it, and it's not emphasized in our education system. We're told that this was a long time ago, everyone has equal rights now. But there are a lot of things I later learned on my own outside of school. Horrifying things that were conveniently left out of textbooks, and for this reason, I cannot partake in this continuation of racial gaslighting. We have a tendency to whitewash our own history, to look back on it through rose-colored glasses. We like to reference the peaceful protests of the civil rights movement in the 60s. We post the more palatable MLK quotes, yet the same week that the Fair Housing Act of 1968 was passed, Martin Luther King was assassinated by white supremacists. Those peaceful protests were not viewed favorably in their time. They were often met with brutality and violence. There are people alive today that had to be escorted to school by the National Guard while protesters screamed racial slurs at Black children. And yes, the civil rights movement accomplished a major win for justice, but many of the institutions that oppressed people of color still remained intact. They just changed their language, and we transitioned right into the war on drugs, which was a thinly veiled assault on communities of color, and it continues to this day. Nobody wants to be called a racist. I get that. We associate it with hate crimes and pure evil, but it comes in different forms and is unfortunately still embedded in the system of this country. So if you're struggling to understand how systemic racism still exists in today's world, or what that even is, I strongly suggest reading The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And if you don't like to or don't have the time to physically read a book, it's also an audiobook. And I also recommend checking out these documentaries. There is also a particular criticism that I've received on my art before, that my paintings are mostly of white people. And while I have painted non-white people, it's undeniably a very small fraction of my body of work as a whole. Art was about self-expression to me, and I didn't really think to step outside my own bubble or about the message I was unintentionally sending. In doing so, I just continued perpetuating society's standards of beauty through my art, standards that are historically very white. It's upsetting to me now in retrospect because I want more people to feel seen and appreciated, not only in my art but everywhere in the world, and not just people that look like me. It's something that I'm committed to change going forward, and I'm very thankful to my viewers for helping me grow as a person and as an artist. I want to share a nonprofit I recently learned about and want to support. So if you are able to, however much you are able to, please consider donating to the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization whose mission is to eradicate stigma around mental health issues in the African American community. They've provided over 1,000 free virtual therapy sessions to communities of color. Mental health is so important, and I think their work is invaluable, especially during a time like this. So if you have the means and you're able to give, do consider supporting them along their mission. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening and understanding. I really hope Breonna gets the justice she deserves, and I hope that many of you will continue fighting for her. I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.